This is a sports show, right? It's football, basketball, hockey, whatever it is, but it's also a culture show. And earlier this year, Timothée Chalamet appeared on College GameDay, and he actually really impressed me with his knowledge of college football. The dude was making predictions and guesses about kind of lower tier Division I football, MAC games, and he knew what he was talking about. So he totally changed my perception on him there. The other day, he won an award for his movie where he's playing Bob Dylan, okay? And I want to bring this up here and get your thoughts on the speech and kind of how this all ties into sports and culture and kind of the pursuit of greatness here. So
the truth is, this was 5.5 years of my life. I poured everything I had into playing this incomparable artist, Mr. Bob Dylan. And I know we're in a subjective business, but the truth is, I'm really in pursuit of greatness. I know people don't usually talk like that, but I want to be one of the greats. I'm inspired by the greats. I'm inspired by the greats here tonight. I'm as inspired by Daniel Day-Lewis, and Marlon Brando, and Viola Davis as I am by Michael Jordan and Michael Phelps, and I want to be up there. So I'm deeply grateful to that. This doesn't signify that, but it's a little more fuel. It's a little more ammo to keep going. Thank you so much.
Scott, so I know you're thrilled for us to be talking about Timothée Chalamet and his speech here at the top of this show. But what he touched on there, and in this tweet that has the clip on it, the person says Timothée Chalamet is so athlete coded, and it shows. That's such Gen Z. Right there. We don't have Mikey here to translate for today. But Scott, thoughts on this? Where do you stand on a speech like this and kind of the pursuit of greatness?
I respect the hell out of the words that came out of his mouth, but to call him athlete coded, no, dude.
Just okay, that's very annoying lingo that Gen Z needs to chill out with. But this is the type of mentality that a great athlete has. There's so much similarity there. So what's your issue with the comparison?
Yeah, there's overlap in the comparison. I agree with that, but it's the same sort of issue that I have with people comparing sports to war. Like, no, not close, not the same thing. I mean, I get what you're trying to aim at, and it's a close analogy, but vastly different worlds. And it's actually quite disrespectful to one to compare the other to it. That's what I'm trying to say. So I brought up stolen valor before. I don't want that to be the case here with an actor playing theater, playing pretend, taking valor from the same sort of mindset as an athlete, even though it is good to have when you're pursuing the heights of your craft.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's fair because I'm with you right there. I absolutely hate that when people are talking about you're getting ready for a football game and they're like, "We're going to war today." We're playing Westview High School. That always drove me crazy. You don't have to compare it to that to get hyped up to the pinnacle of your capabilities mentally. You don't have to pretend that you're going to war. It still is a sport. That always bothered the hell out of me, dude.
Yeah. Stepping out onto the gridiron and throwing a football or tackling somebody, not the same thing as dodging bullets.
Well, you mean to tell me that filling an ISO gap on 3rd and 2 with a fullback coming your way, you got to take on who's 40 pounds heavier than you? That's not like war? That's what I had to do. I left with a lot of bruised shoulders, but no, you're right. I'm with you on that 100%. But I get what you're saying on the comparison there and the quote unquote stolen valor of athletes in that sense. But I do respect the hell out of this also because for some reason, people in society, there is from a lot of corners of society, a negative attitude on people who are pursuing greatness, who say, "Hey, I want to do something great. I want to leave my mark. I want to live completely up to my potential." And it's like there's something that I touched on that's quite prevalent here in Europe with the tall poppy syndrome, where everyone's like, "Why do you think you're so special that you're going to be great?" When I think we should all be having the complete opposite perspective on that and the complete opposite attitude on that. If somebody is striving to be great, and they've shown the talent and the work ethic for it, hey man, I'm rooting for you right here.
Look, in the essence, I think this is exactly what everybody, regardless of the profession or craft, this is the mentality you should have.
So everybody take the same attitude as Timothée Chalamet and go try and be great.
This is a classic conversation between two guys who used to play football and also went to film school. So this is a convergence and a marriage of worlds right now that we're
this is perfect for us, dude. This is absolutely perfect for us. But speaking of which, Len, then let's shift gears because it's so perfect for it. We gotta touch on this of Stephen A. Smith. So we talked a little bit about Europe and stars in North American sports leagues coming from Europe. So let's take a look here at what Stephen A. Smith has had to say about an international player being the face of the NBA.
My personal opinion is I don't believe an international player can be the face of the NBA. I know they're global iconic figures. Their popularity extends globally, but the NBA is an American-born sport. And it needs to resonate in America. And if it doesn't resonate in America, then it's not going to matter to America how you resonate beyond.
Yeah.
Basically, Stephen A. coming out and saying that the face of the NBA has to be an American-born star. I mean, we've seen an increase in the number of guys who have been born internationally come and be absolute superstars in the NBA. What are your thoughts on this, dude? Do you agree with him?
Yeah, there's definitely truth in what he's saying. It's not to say that the NBA and basketball can't continue on and be successful in international markets, because we're seeing that in China and across Africa. Definitely, like the explosion of fandom is hard to ignore. But I think he's right in the sense that if the NBA loses its American fan base as the foundation, it's going to have headwinds in the future. But I also say, like, look, over the past 20 years, we've had an American as the face of the NBA, and we've talked about it a couple of times over the past couple of episodes about how, hey, LeBron is the one who took up the helm after Kobe.
Right.
And yeah, Steph had a blip on the radar, or is like, for a stretch there was the number 2 face for quite some time, or arguably the face. It's seemingly just in the way in which those guys have approached and fostered the game to this point, and or infused an element to the game that's probably not palpable to the American audience. And we're seeing that in the decline of viewership and engagement across the board. So it's like you already have what you're saying needs to remain, but it's not working. I think he needs to come out and clearly state that it needs to be a certain type of American with a certain type of mindset, like a Timothée Chalamet that comes in and takes over the NBA.
Dude, I think you solved it. Timothée Chalamet is going to become the new face of the NBA. Timothée Chalamet is going to be running point with the Los Angeles Lakers, him and Luka. Dude, yeah, I think that I like that point that it has to be a certain type of player. And that's what I wanted to ask you is, what do we think actually are the characteristics that make a player the face of a league, whether it's the NBA, whether it's the NHL, or whether it's the NFL? Because I think there's a difference between somebody who's absolutely dominant on the field or on the court or on the ice, and somebody that could be considered the face of a league. So what characteristics jump out to you? You feel like, okay, this is what a face of the league needs to look like.
Well, I can tell you first and foremost, it has nothing to do with immutable characteristics. That's
Right.
for sure. It doesn't matter what the guy looks like or
Sorry,
skin
let
color or
me
anything.
interrupt you real quick. When I say looks like, I meant in a metaphorical sense, not
right.
Okay. Just so you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, I understood what you were saying. I just want to
Okay.
make it clear to the audience or any of the viewers who are watching. It's like that is not the driver for what
Thank you.
becomes the face of the NBA or any
Yeah.
sport for that matter. It's all about the drive and passion that athlete takes to the field or the court or wherever they play, whatever surface they play on. And that is what fans are driven to and attached to when they see that passion, that drive, that insanity, that psycho mentality.
Right.
That's what people are like, whoa, talking about the ideal as we were at the top of the show. That is what they're looking at. And they see somebody pursuing that with all of their will, with all of their might, and they're trying to attain that. And that's inspirational to fans. And that's what people are like, yo, even though I may not like this guy in terms because he's on a team that I don't like,
Right.
I still can't help but respect his drive and his passion and what he's doing for the sport and pushing the boundaries of his physical capabilities as well as his teams. He's bringing people along with him, which is, again, inspirational. And I think that is what's at the core of the characteristic of who becomes the face of the league. And you look at Patrick Mahomes, he clearly has something in him akin to the Tom Brady before him. And he's taken his team to a new level. He comports himself in a way that's not necessarily jarring because it's cookie cutter. It's very clear that his drive and his his mindset is strictly focused on one thing, and that's winning.
Right. I think I'm with you on many of those points. Or there, I also think it's important for the player. Like, think about some of our past faces of the NBA. It's guys that, like, everyone just seeped into culture of guys. If you're throwing something away in a garbage can across the room, you yell Kobe, or just like guys who, in the front yard on the driveway with your basketball hoop, you can try and emulate Michael Jordan in the way that he plays. You're kind of backing somebody down and slapping the hands off, and some of these things that are sort of really relatable, and that's the masses of players who are playing can identify with him in some way. It's hard. Now I'm speaking strictly about the NBA right now. I think it's harder for a 7-footer or a big man to be the face of the NBA, just because the way that those guys play traditionally is not so relatable to the average young kid basketball player. It's gonna be relatable to the kid that's playing power forward or center in high school and middle school, but for the average kid, the big man is not necessarily going to be the one that is most relatable. So I also think that the position and the way that you play comes into it. I think you've got to be marketable in a certain sense. Like, you can't necessarily be the bad boy. Dennis Rodman was not the face of the NBA. Michael was. Now, Michael was he wasn't the bad boy, but he had that intensity on the court. But off the court, he was pretty beloved, and he was very marketable. So I think that also comes into play when we're talking about the face of the guys for a league.
Yeah, that's fair. And it's a good counter argument to our point earlier about, it doesn't matter what somebody looks like. There is an element of reality there where people can see themselves in another person because they, as I mentioned before with my example that was cutting against my original argument, Patrick Mahomes not looking like an Adonis. So there is something there, and seeing that kind of person excel and defeat people who may look like that is also something that gives people hope and fans hope, which may...
I don't know, dude, if look like is the thing. I think is can I play like him? Like, remember a few weeks ago when I was said, hey, when I was growing up, I was the Trailblazers fan, and I identified so much more with Damon Stoudemire because he was the point guard and I was a point guard than I did with Arvydas Sabonis, who was the European big man. I identified with the American point guard because I could see my game in his game. So I think it has more to do with that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I'm just saying people will probably take what we were talking about with the physical characteristics of somebody being too big and them not being able to be the face of the sport, and then cutting against our original argument. So, like, I just wanted to state that it's like, I agree with you. It has more to do with the actual play, while the physical abilities or makeup does play a very, very small minor role. It's not the main role, though. It's all about the characteristics, the style of play, the repeatability, or the pursuit to try and repeat that same sort of style. So that's what kind of brings it. But all in all, I still boil it down to the approach and the mindset of that athlete, and how they comport themselves in front of the masses, the media. So, like you mentioned, MJ, definitely a marketable dude because he just focused on ball, and you could see that in his gameplay. And then on top of that, when you start getting into like divisive off-court opinions and so on and so forth, you're going to start creating enemies even within the fandom, and that's just part and parcel of the problem. So, like, if you want to have somebody who's just the face, it's better if they just are singularly focused on winning in their sport, and that's what people are driven to, because it's like, okay, nothing else matters. It's literally all about ball, all about winning.
Yeah, and that's why I like quite respect a guy like Patrick Mahomes recently in the NFL, who is just like, he's not talking about politics. He's not trying to be divisive at all. I listened to a few people or reporters ask Patrick Mahomes, and this was like leading up to the American presidential election too, when things were pretty hot, asking him political questions, and Mahomes handled it so well. He just said, "Yeah, man, I've got people that I love on both sides of the aisle that I communicate with and talk with. I think the important thing is we just all talk to each other and have open dialogue, and it doesn't. He's not coming out with any sort of hot statements or anything, and it just there's no divisiveness in his messaging the way he is. I want to throw this up because I think it's totally possible for a European player or an international player to be the face of the NBA. Here's a tweet right now for those just listening and thrown up. Daily reminder, there is zero reason for Luka to not be the face of the league. Luka speaks English, Spanish, Slovenian, and Serbian on top of having a large fan base of American and international fans. I'd much rather the face of the league have pull in both categories. And there's a lot of credibility here, and this is quite a good argument, I would say, because I was just trying to look it up of like, what is the distribution of NBA viewers globally? What percent are American? What percent are international outside the States? It's hard to really pinpoint it down, but it's looking like it's about 50-50, maybe even slanting more towards international fans, that fan base outside the States is even bigger. So I do think that Luka Dončić is kind of that next man up, and he does have those characteristics. I think kids can kind of see themselves in it. I mean, he's literally quite international. Americans love him, Europeans and international fans love him. So to me, this is very possible that Luka is next with the crown. What do you think?
It's a logical evolution, especially with how he's gone about his career thus far, and he's still so young. What is he, like 28? Maybe.
I think he's 25. I think he's 25. Let me look that up.
Yeah, look, he's got another 10 years if he remains healthy, God willing, and so on and so forth. And there's an element of, you can tell while he may approach the game with a European style, there's a sort of grit that he kind of brings to the game.
Mm-hmm.
And in competition, we talk a lot about how we love to see competitors compete and having that mindset of an MJ or Tom Brady or Tiger Woods, when he was on the pinnacle and all that kind of stuff. And that's what people are drawn to. And it seems like Luka kind of has that, but it's also baked into his upbringing, his environment, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, dude, you know what? I mean, we've been talking about NBA ratings decline and the problems that the league is having. The NBA needs to allow what they do in Europe, where those fans come in and they've got players in there and they got the drums and the chanting. How crazy would that be, dude? What do you think? How do you think our American NBA players would respond to that?
I don't think they would respond very well. I mean, even our GMs and front office organizations are kicking fans out for saying fire them.
Yeah, dude.
So, like that's definitely not in the cards for American culture right now, especially as things are sitting. So maybe in the future, hopefully.
That's my advice to Adam Silver is do my solution with the 3-point line variability. And then we make threes, dunks were 3, and then fans can have drums and flares, and you have basically there. That's a fun game to watch. So while
and then fourth, you'll have to do Mikey's ask, expand the court and take the dome off so that you can just be in the arena out in the elements.
Well, it's about the man in the arena, isn't it, Scott? Okay, it's about the man in the arena. While we're talking about all this kind of the background of NBA players and sort of the who these guys are, this tweet went really viral a while back, and I wanted to bring it up with you because we mentioned it on the show once before. This is a tweet. NBA players really don't come from the trenches no more. And this is some Gen Z slang right here, so I'm going to try my best to translate it since we don't have Mikey. But basically, NBA players previously have been known, not all of them, but it's been quite common for players to come from lower socioeconomic background situations, and playing basketball and having success with that has been seen sort of as a way out, and it's given a lot of success to a lot of people from those backgrounds. Lately, the NBA and the players that are in the NBA, there's been a higher percentage of those guys that are coming from middle class to upper middle class backgrounds. And a lot of this has to do with sort of the nature of youth basketball now and the cost associated with that and kind of what it takes to develop as a basketball player right now. And I've got a couple stats here that I want to throw out at you, Scott. But first, before I do that, I want to get your thoughts on this.
Well, classic. This goes back to what we were talking about at the top, conflating sports or life with war. Trenches. Yeah. But anyway, I there's definitely some credence to this. Look, the way in which AAU basketball has become the main driver for recruiting in college athletics, it's It's pushing people who are not capable of fronting that money to pursue other things, which like isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? If they pursue and become great at other things, shout out NCAA. But there's an element of it's becoming a higher barrier to entry, and a lot of people who are going into the system do have the means. Whereas otherwise, everybody had a shot prior to, you played for your high school team and that was it. And that's how you got recognized by college scouts. And that's why I go to, and I know a lot of people we were talking about hockey over the past 2 episodes who were saying like, oh, hockey will never be as popular as basketball because of the high barrier to entry due to cost and how you have to go out there and skate. You have to buy ice time. You have to buy all the equipment and so on and so forth, travel, everything. AAU is getting to that point. Granted, you don't have the equipment. All you need is a ball and a hoop. But at the same time, the number of tournaments, the amount of travel, all of that kind of stuff adds up, and it's keeping people from pursuing it. And they may be playing it outside and at the parks and so on and so forth. But that's not where the scouts necessarily recognize people, regardless of what the movies say. They go to the AAU tournaments, and that's how they do it. So that's why I love football. I always bring it back to football in some way, shape, or form because. Yes, there is a lot of equipment. There's all that kind of stuff, but there are so few games and you can't play it forever or for year round.
Right.
And it's all centralized at a specific spot, which is the youth leagues and then the middle schools and then high school. And that is where it remains. And I think there's something healthy about that is it remains enclosed and it won't grow to untethered sizes like basketball is becoming.
That's a great point, dude. And granted, there is more equipment in football, and technically you need the upfront investment, but a lot of this is going schools from the teams themselves. NFL and college teams, they do a great job of providing football equipment to youth teams. So that is usually not going to be the problem for a kid, no matter what kind of family background he comes from. He's going to be able to play football and he's going to be able to play it. And there's sort of a level playing field here with these are my opportunities to play football as a youth. And I have the same opportunities as a kid from a rich family, which is a beautiful thing about football right there, that everybody can kind of do that. And with AAU and the way that these things are becoming year round, and you got to fly to Miami and you got to fly to Oakland and you got to stay at hotels in order to keep up with everybody to try to get recruited. Well, that's what leads me to some of these statistics. Now, check these out. From 1981 to 2001, so kind of like that previous generation of the NBA that we were talking about a little bit when we were kids, and then kind of at the tail end of that, we're going to be about 10 years old or so. There were of second generation players in the NBA. So NBA players whose father had played in the NBA. It was 1.3% of players in the NBA. And that jumped over the course of those 20 years to 1.6. So not a big jump, 1.3% to 1.6% over the course of 20 years. Since 2001, that number has jumped to over 7% of players in the NBA are second generation. So obviously, if your dad played in the NBA, unless he made really terrible investments, you probably grew up reasonably comfortable, I'm assuming. And so you got to have all these benefits of the AAU, and you kind of probably came from a middle class or upper middle class background. And so that jump is so extreme in the last 20 years. And I think that this kind of just speaks to what we're talking about here and what you said, Scott.
Yeah, I would say that definitely aligns with what we were talking about here, but there's also an element here where even Mikey brought it up in last episode where he was talking about Deion Sanders and Shedeur and being like, okay, well, Deion knows the ropes. He knows how to kind of train. He knows how to become a professional in all respects. He knows how to become that upper echelon sort of dude. So I think while what we're talking about may ring true, and yes, the financial situation of those people has much more security than many others. I think there's also an element and a more of a concerted effort by those who did play to push their child to heights that they were at once. Whether that be for better or for worse, whether it's living through their kid vicariously to try and continue their own career or continue their own name in an unhealthy manner, or if it's just like, hey, I want my kid to be the best at what they do, and I'm going to push them to help, or I'm going to push to help get them there. There are a multitude of factors that I think play into this, but it's an interesting statistic. I can't believe it's actually increased that much. That's wild.
Yeah. I mean, I was really...
Boy, did I fall by the wayside in that percentage.
Yeah, dude.
Good Lord.
Why did your dad not make you an NBA player? Okay? Or a professional tennis player? You and me both, dude. You and me both. No, I think that's fair what you brought up there, that we cannot just isolate that to the financial aspect of things. And maybe a lot of that comes down to the actual parenting and the drive from the parents, because they like, look, let's look at two of the faces. We're talking about faces of leagues. Two of the faces of our major sports leagues the past 15 years, 10 years is Steph Curry in the NBA and Patrick Mahomes in the NFL. Both of those guys are sons of professional athletes. Granted, Patrick Mahomes, his father was a baseball player, but he's just been around sort of that Timothée Chalamet mentality of what it takes to be great. Okay. And so I do think that there is a lot of, but then at the same time, you had a guy like LeBron James who didn't come from that sort of situation. So it's interesting to see how that has shifted. And we touched on it. Like, does that play into actually how basketball is played on NBA courts now, that it's a little bit more finesse, a little less tough and nitty gritty as it was in the 90s? I don't know. I mean, I think that there's some credence to that.
Yeah, for sure. I forget who said it. It was a fighter, a boxer, who said it's very difficult to get up and start training when you're waking up in satin sheets or silk
yes.
sheets. Yeah. It's it's that mentality. When life does become very easy, it's very hard to continue to pursue the heights with that same sort of mindset. And it's just natural. It's human nature when you get into that scenario. If you don't have something that's driving you forward or making you run towards something, out of just pure desperation, then the intensity, like, you have to engineer it in your own mind. And that's why I loved the stories about Tom Brady or Michael Jordan specifically, when a guy would just say hello in a certain way to him, literally nicely or something. He would somehow find a way to make that like a slight at him, so he would go out and dominate in the game. Being able to flip that switch, that's what's so insane. And we love the underdog story as fans, and as Americans specifically, we love the underdog story, and we're losing it with this thread.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. We do love the underdog story, and kind of the second generation player. It doesn't feel as underdog, generally speaking, of course. All right, let's hit, while we're sitting on basketball, let's hit on college basketball. Top 25. Try and get all of these in here if we can see. There we go. Scott, anything that you notice about this top 25, and I'm kind of putting you on the spot here. Does anything jump out to you? Because there's a few glaring things to me.
Well, first and foremost, it's the domination of the SEC so far. I think, look, you got Auburn, Florida, Tennessee, Alabama, and going down. Shoot, I mean, A&M. What? I know Buzz Williams is there. He's done a solid job and everything like that. But
Missouri,
Missouri. The SEC is coming to the cream of the crop here. And I know there's been a lot of discussion over the season about how the SEC has now taken the pinnacle and taken that crown from the ACC, which is, honestly, you look at the bracketology and the projections right now, I think the ACC only has like 3, maybe 4 projected teams in the NCAA tournament, whereas the SEC has like 8 or 9, which is wild to talk about. And I think there's a changing of the guard here occurring in real time. And I don't think anybody is like willing to admit it fully yet.
No, dude. I mean, it's kind of like we had this conversation in football season about sort of the changing of the guard from the SEC being the football powerhouse conference to now the Big Ten kind of stole a lot of that thunder this year. Well, now we're seeing the SEC is kind of filling that gap with their basketball success. That was you hit it, dude. That was the thing that I was like, wow, that's really jumping out of me. Also, that's jumping out of me that's a little bit sad is, where are the former Pac-12 teams, dude? Like, the only one is Arizona, and it's like what? There's just decimated. I know the Pac-12 doesn't exist anymore, but I would expect to see at least 2 or 3 of those guys in the top 25. Additionally, the lack of some of these sort of blue blood college basketball brands that we have seen, like, Georgetown. I know that was a long time ago and I'm biased, but hey, come on. That one doesn't really count. That's just for me. But like UConn, Kansas, UCLA, North Carolina, some of these sort of like blue blood college basketball brands that are not here. And we're seeing the SEC kind of take over. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it is surprising to see this year. It's been so volatile for those blue bloods, but you do have the Duke, you do have the Dukes, you do have the Kentuckys, remaining true and at least holding out. in that regard. It's very crazy to see, and it's happened over a pretty quick timeline here. I would say over the past 3 seasons, the SEC has really been biting at the heels of the ACC, and it's like everything switched this year. All of the blue bloods fell apart. I mean, even seeing like St. John's there, I know we covered Rick Pitino in his halftime speech early on, but seeing him bring that organization, which has a great history in college basketball, seeing him within the past 2-3 seasons bring them out of the depths and right the ship is incredible. It's like a la Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame and bringing him from the from behind, great rich history, leaning on that and just instilling that pursuit and drive of Timothée Chalamet at the forefront of all their teams so that they can win. It's really impressive. The one other thing I got to say is the consistency of the Big Ten, their ranking and their prowess in football and now basketball. They have just as many as the SEC here, and they're dominating just as much, which is incredible.
Also, they just had a really successful game, Michigan State and Michigan. They had the 8th most watched men's regular season college basketball game ever on Fox. So, I mean, that's a lot of qualifiers right there, but it's still impressive. And well, the thing is, I think like with games like these, this is what sells, man, that emotion, that rivalry. I mean, Michigan State, and it is impressive what the Big Ten is doing, being so consistent, football and basketball. Like they are year round, man, kind of in the conversation, regardless of what sport we're talking about. Yeah. I did have this I want to throw up. So, because you were talking about kind of the volatility. So for those just listening, this is a tweet that says, this is the 4th time in the last 55 years that half the men's college basketball preseason top 10 is now unranked. In fact, preseason number 1 Kansas is out of the top 25 for the first time in 80 AP polls. So if we scroll down here, we'll see like Kansas, who was preseason number 1, out. UConn, preseason number 3. Gonzaga at 6. Baylor at 8. And North Carolina at 9. So we were talking about some of those blue bloods, dude, and it's just, I mean, very unpredictable and volatile this year in college basketball.
Yeah, three of those teams, UConn, Kansas, North Carolina, being out. Those are through and through blue bloods. Yes. I can't believe they've fallen to such a degree. Especially, looking at UConn, you can make the argument that it's not wildly surprising because they've had such sustained success over the past 2 years that they're ultimately going to lose a lot of guys to the NBA draft or portal hopping or something like that. So they probably deserve a rebuilding year, but to be out of the top 25 in their rebuilding year is a little concerning. And if Dan Hurley is the best coach in this MFing league, you would assume that they'd at least tickle the top 25. And I don't know where they sit. They may be 30th or something like that, but it's kind of wild to see.
Dan Hurley's got to roll around on the floor a little bit more and scream about the refs, maybe get them in the top 25. Dude, that dude just, I do not like that at all. Dude, last thing on college basketball, I'll go back to this because St. Mary's is in there and at number 23.
WCC.
I wanted to ask you about that because obviously your dad was the athletic director at University of Portland for years of just like the world of mid-major basketball schools like this, like St. Mary's or like, some of those West Coast Conference schools, Portland. What are your thoughts on the mid-majors?
He's back in the WCC as the AD for University of San Francisco as well. So back in the WCC, it's been a consistent conference for as long as I can remember, as long as he's been a part of that because of the Gonzagas, because of the St. Mary's, but with Patty Mills and Dellavedova and those guys that came through in the early to late 2000s, they helped bring St. Mary's to prominence. And talk about international guys, like those are Aussies. And St. Mary's has found a pipeline from Australia basketball and that culture to the States. And they've utilized that and they've mined that to a great degree. And they remain very consistent, similar to how Gonzaga was in the very early 2000s or late 90s. And they built upon that program. So it's awesome to see these mid-major conferences who aren't part of the Big Four sort of power conferences or anything like that. It's awesome to see these mid-majors. You could even couple the Big East, the new Big East, in that ball there. It's great to see them pursuing and reaching heights like this, and it's just about consistency. And it doesn't matter how much money you have behind them. It's like it's all about the culture and the coaching and who you're getting onto the team that really drives people and pushes them forward. And it's belief within that small community. You can have a whole lot of belief in that small community and achieve great heights. And I think St. Mary's is emblematic of that.
Well, dude, this is one of the things that I think college basketball does the absolute best is kind of creating these scenarios, these sort of Cinderella scenarios. Because we have the March Madness 64 team tournament, you get some of these schools from sort of the mid-major conferences that aren't from the Big Four, that are maybe not perceived to be the elite of the elite, and they're coming in at maybe a 10, 11, 12 seed. But they make a run in the conference or in the tournament. And every year there's a school that's sort of America's darling, because just as you were saying, man, we love an underdog. We absolutely love to root for an underdog. And I think the kind of this format of college basketball really gives us one of those to root for. And we're getting it now slightly, or we're getting a little bit of that when we go back to the college football playoff this year. When you look at somebody like Arizona State, who was sort of the underdog, sort of Cinderella story. And so I think that's a really special thing about college basketball and kind of this format here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just college basketball takes it to another degree because, one, yes, it's a much larger tournament and 64 teams, but also football, you're not going to see like a MAC school necessarily. Well, I mean, hey, you may. My sister will be really mad that I said that, but you're not necessarily going to see a MAC school come into the 12-team playoff and kind of jar things up like Arizona State did. Like, there needs to be a certain level of recruiting poll money to really help generate a football team to have them succeed at those upper echelons and at that level.
Right.
But that's what's so beautiful about the game of basketball is, like, just like it's any given Sunday or any given Saturday for football, it's honestly any night for a basketball team, so long as they rebound and shoot the ball well.
Dude, that's the thing. I mean, that's why we have series in basketball and baseball, because within an individual game, so much variation can happen. And, a team that is not necessarily as skilled or as talented as the other can win because of those variations. Of course, that can happen in football as well. But it is, usually when you have a football game, the better team is going to win more often than in basketball. I mean, that's the entire reason that it's one and done in football playoffs, but in basketball playoffs, you have the series. And so I think that kind of plays into that as well. So there we have it. Okay, there we go. That's good. Just a quick one today. No Mikey. Got a little basketball. I like talking about basketball, dude. I'm getting excited for March Madness.
I'm very excited. And talking about the Pac-12 dissolving and everything like that, Oregon State and Washington State ended up joining the WCC. So the USF Dons they're playing the Beavers here. I think it's on Wednesday. I think it's tomorrow night, if not Thursday. Yeah. So
in San Fran or in Corvallis?
Yeah, it's in Corvallis. So Dad's going to be up there in Corvallis playing the Beavs. Big game for the Dons. They're right now, I think, 2.5 games behind St. Mary's and neck with Gonzaga in the league. So they need this win, and then they face Gonzaga, I believe, at Gonzaga. And they really need that W heading into the WCC tournament in Vegas here next week. So we're
rooting for USF, for the Williams family.
Root for the Dons, baby.
Well, actually, when they're playing the Beavs, I'm not going to be. But I wish you guys the best on the other games. Tell your dad to go meet up with Andy when he's in Corvallis.
Andy, go to the game.
He'll go to the game. He's been gone. All right, good stuff. Everybody, thank you for watching, and we will be back and see you on Friday.